you.
And we're live as we talk about my wife dressing me properly. I dress myself. Thank you very much. Welcome to you, the viewer. Welcome to our fantastic panel, everyone around me. It's the After Dram. That means it's time to unwind. It's time to put your feet up. It's time to grab a dram and or a cocktail and or two or a tea in some cases. As a quick recap to our early afternoon, Dave, Kent over there, and Nick and I were enthralled by the words of Andrew. We were taken on another journey, really, and we decided that we needed to have this book for us for Isla. It wasn't just a book about the distilleries, which I look for generally and the geeky parts of it, but the integration of everything else within the island, the people, the landscape, the history, all melding into one that gives us a better picture of what Isla is. So thank you very much, Andrew. Quick introductions, but we're going to put up the book. This is the book right here we're all talking about. Nick's got the older one, Peat, Smoking Spirit. We've got the newer one. It's a beautiful book. You should buy it if you haven't already done so. Thank you very much. So let's do that. Quick introductions again. What's in your glass? And we're going to go alphabetically, just like we did before. Dave, Kent, Nick, and Andrew. We're starting with you first because my wife just told me to. Said start with Andrew. Andrew, please start. Or she'll be really
great to be with you all. And what I've got in my glass is what I've had every week so far, because it's the only kind of proper Isla bottle I've got with me, which is Lafroig foreword.
It's proper.
I live down in France, and the range of stuff I can get hold of isn't enormous down here. But I must kind of do something about that. So anyway, that's what I'm drinking. It's a lovely dram, and it takes me all the way to Isla with one sniff.
And I've been looking for that bottle as well. So if anyone on our panel finds it, we have to buy it because I've been looking available here now. Thank you very much. Dave, you're up.
Hey guys, Yukon Dave coming from the basement. This is a non-Isla peated. You heard the whole story earlier. I just got a phone call about 15 minutes ago. The whiskey I wanted is in, so maybe next week. Back to you, Dolph.
Done. That sounded so enthusiastic. I'm happy that we went to you.
We love you, Dave. I've actually gone to Carnmore, the Kalila, for the After Dram here. And I have been searching for that foreword from Lafroig as well, and it's just not available here in Canada. Well, at least not in Florida. And we do get a fair amount of stock of everything from around the world. So some of you can see behind here.
We'll track it down. We will. Is that going to be a bottle kill this afternoon?
This?
Yeah. I just no.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nick, you're up
tonight around the fire. Yeah.
What?
I have Tochida, and I've actually poured a wee sample just to enjoy the aroma of the smoke.
Excellent. Awesome. And I went to an exceptionally peaty Octomore. So this is one of my favorites. 7.4 is my ultimate favorite. 7.1 is very good as well. And we've been talking about peat, and I had peat on my mind. So I'm going to, and the PPMs with this, and we're going to talk about PPMs in a bit. But this one is, if I'm looking for it, 208 PPMs parts per million. But there's even heavier ones that we have as well. So welcome to everyone. And I'm going to start with a little, well, quote. It is kind of a quote, but I'm not putting the quote on for you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read because I feel justified in something. So I stay with me, please. So I learned something about our author this week as I read the 3/4 point. So the halfway point to the 3/4 point of this book. And we heard smatterings of this last week, but I believe that I can attest that Andrew is a romantic and that he, like I, is moved by sentiment. So in answering the question, does Bunnahabhain crystal clear water affect the flavor of the spirit? Andrew tells us that most in the industry would attest and describes how one of my favorite distillers in Oban even uses tap water. But his response, though, made me smile. On page 211, the experts may be right, Yet, I can't help rejoicing in my secret ignorance in the fact that Bunnahabhain's water trickles directly into the mash tun from the vast intestinal masses of quartzite, dolostone, and dimictite. Someone's going to help me with that. Which compose Isla's northern hump. Would the whiskey be the same if the water was exactly the same stuff that flows out of the taps in Birmingham? I don't believe so. So I say a hearty ha! I am not the only romantic person here, the only one with romantic views. I am seconded by the author. Thank you very much. And I wanted to put that out there because people laugh at me, Nick, because of my romantic views sometimes. But that's okay. I can handle it. I just had to say that. Anyone else here feel a little bit romantic when you're talking about Islay and the water source or the peat bogs? Or what's the name of the bugs that, sorry, not the mosquitoes, because they're worse than mosquitoes, the ones that
ticks. The ticks.
I was thinking of the other one.
You mean the clegs? The ones, the clegs, yeah.
The slow-moving dumb bugs that bite.
Yeah.
I had the vision of just this giant bug with big eyes landing on your arm all the time. I can't get that out of my head.
That's Australia.
I also read a story about those specifically because at a certain point in time, if you were caught as an adulterer, you were tied naked and they would attack you. And it was an agonizing night, I was told. So I wasn't told directly, but I was listening to. And actually, I won't say who it's from. It's another author. It's all good. We're talking about Andrew right now and nothing but Andrew. Andrew, are you a sentimental guy at heart? I'm hoping you.
Well, the way I would come at this question is to say that actually I don't believe it is romanticism or sentiment.
Okay.
I believe it's, a part of our apprehension of place is everything we know about a place.
Yep.
All of the knowledge we bring to that place is a part of our apprehension of place.
Okay.
And we know that the water is coming from deep in the heart of the island. These very special, often very ancient stones that the island has. From nowhere else. It cannot, it's coming pure from that place on Earth. And it's not the same as coming from a municipal water supply in the second largest city in the UK. Even if the technical guys are absolutely right, even if it has no effect, no palpable effect on the whiskey itself, nonetheless, it's still an important distinction. It's still an important part of our knowledge about this product and this place. It adds richness and preciousness to our experience of it.
Yep.
So I wouldn't call it romanticism. I wouldn't call it sentiment. I would just say it is part of our knowledge and our understanding, and it adds to our enjoyment because it's part of our knowledge and our understanding. And therefore it is different, even if technically we haven't been able to ever prove it's different. That's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is, okay, they've done all the tests. They say, people can't tell the difference, whatever, fine. But there will be a difference. Of course, there has to be a difference because these are completely different water sources. They will have different spectrum of elements in them, of trace elements in them. So there will be a difference to some extent or another, even if it's not palpable to most people's sensorial equipment. So we can still say there is a difference, even if they say it doesn't matter, there still is a difference. And I would just leave it there. It's not romanticism, it's knowledge and understanding. And okay, they say there's no difference. We perhaps trust them in that word, but still there must be a difference because the things are different that we're talking about. There is difference there. And it has to be palpable it has to be present to some extent, even if it's not palpable. Well,
okay. But you didn't answer the question. Are you a romantic? It might not have been a romantic notion there, which maybe I misinterpreted. I still think I'm right. However, I'll bow to. But are you a romantic at heart when you go to these places? Are you moved by sentiment?
Yeah, well, yes, of course. I mean, when we come to the Shipwreck chapter, when we earlier on looked at the recent history and we heard about the wartime stories and the letters that were written. You know, you can't help but be moved by these things. They're very moving, by the accounts of people being turfed off their land, you know, in the time of the sort of the clearances and the evictions. These are all very moving stories. And yes, of course, I am moved by those, moved to tears sometimes, absolutely. Certainly when I was writing the stuff about the shipwrecks, it was hard not to be moved to tears when you imagine what people had gone through. So yes, I'm very sensitive in that respect. Something about me always kind of is a little bit unhappy with the word romantic. I don't know what it is.
Okay.
It's the sort of color that the word has.
I don't find it diminishing.
Because very often romantic is sort of somehow implying that you have to leave reason behind, or that there's something contemptible about reason, which I don't believe at all. As we said earlier, or as we discussed in the first program, I'm a great believer and supporter of scientific endeavor.
Yeah.
Science is truth. Science is the way we move forward. Science is the way we understand things. And of course, that part of human experience cannot play any role in scientific inquiry, for example. So you know, it's not the only way I'd like to describe myself, but yes, I definitely have a tender side, for sure. And you know, I enjoyed that side of my personality being engaged by this project as much as I did the scientific and inquisitorial side.
Excellent.
I got a comment here.
Go for it, Dave.
If I may.
You may. You definitely may. Go ahead.
Andrew, is it Bunnahabhain that brings their water directly in, piped in?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so you painted a picture that for me was just, when you said that Bunnahabhain's water is brought in directly by pipes and it's never sees the light of day and there's no dead sheep in it. Well, I don't want to be drinking whiskey that had dead sheep in the water source.
Well, I did see 3 dead sheep in different water sources when I was researching this book. So you probably have already drunk whiskey which had dead sheep in it.
That's not romantic, but it's unappealing.
You know, there's sheep wandering the hillside, and very often the streams are kind of easy places for them to come to grief. It's not much of a problem as long as they don't entirely block the stream. In the way that, by the way, that otter I wrote about entirely blocked the water supply to Bunnahabhain on one occasion.
Which it's a bad thing. Which was
if you lose the water supply, it's the worst thing.
So, anything else from the panel before I go on?
I look at the romance kind of being where we came and not so much where we are today, but the whole past. That to me is kind of romantic, and I could just see the people struggling and the horrible weather conditions and like you said, the shipwrecks, all that kind of stuff.
I agree.
That really adds to the story.
And our connection to the whiskey itself and to the people we're drinking the whiskey with is what I usually go to. All right. Anything else before I go on?
Just before we finish on this, Dolph, as well, you know, maybe I should say that when I was sort of thinking about writing the book, by then I'd been doing this job for 12, 14 years, writing about wine, writing about beer, writing about spirits, including whiskey, writing about cigars, writing about perfume as well. So I'd done a lot of traveling for these sensory products, including to, you know, wonderful places like Tuscany, like Bordeaux, like Burgundy. That's nice. You know, magnificent places. But I remember thinking when I first set eyes on Islay and came to that part of the world, which was actually to Jura before Islay, I remember thinking, wow, you know, this is the most romantic place I've ever been. I remember thinking that word came to my mind at that stage. And you talking about it now has reminded me of that. So it would be dishonest if I didn't own up to the fact that, yes, that feeling of romantic power, romantic awe was an initial part of why I wanted to write the book. So, yeah, Thanks for reminding me of that.
Excellent. Well, and you reminded me of the scientific component because I'm a math teacher. I could not get through if I didn't have faith in the scientific element. But I do appreciate the romanticism, and I don't think it's a negative, or there should be a negative connotation to. Although there is, when people think that you're a romantic in the rose-colored glasses, I can see that. But how we temper it. Let's go intelligence and history with the romantic notion all integrated together. I think that's perfect. All right.
Yeah, and maybe, you know, if you don't like the word romantic, maybe the word is emotion. You know, something is emotionally stirring in you.
Sure.
When you read the stories, when you think about this place, when you come to your experience of it, which, for example, when you go to Bordeaux, it's beautiful, it's grand, it's seductive, but does it have the same emotional draw on you? I really don't think it does. There's so much sort of wealth and prosperity there, and you know, your experience of it is a bit different. You know, I'm a great music fan. I apologize if you know, the analogy I'm about to make doesn't click with some of you, because everybody's musical tastes are different, and what can we do about that? But you know, if you think of the music of Bach, it's very, very moving. It's extraordinarily moving. And then you think of the music of Schubert, which is also extraordinarily moving. But there is that emotional dimension which could be called romantic, early romantic, stirrings of romanticism in Schubert, which is completely absent in Bach. And yet they're both equally moving in their own different ways. Yep. Bach, it's almost as if he's peering into the human spirit and the human experience in an almost scientific way. It's just he sees it in musical form with such a beautiful, consummate grasp of form and pattern that it moves you enormously. Whereas Schubert, your spirit, your stomach, your intestines, your every part of your body and your heart above all is being tugged the whole time because of the way that he wrote his music and he experienced his music. So there are many analogies like this that we could draw, I think. I'm sure you all have your own musical analogies of that sort.
And the human experience does nothing but add to our communal, our shared experience together, much like what's happening today, which is good, I think. I'm going to Bruichladdich. Let's go to Bruichladdich. So, Andrew, you experienced Bruichladdich at its revival, and you told us some of their aspirations, and this is great. So that's in 2004. They wanted to have the Single Malt Academy, a library devoted to whiskey and Celtic culture, and 80-seater restaurant. And I'm wondering if anyone here's looked back and find out, did they achieve all of this? Because many of us here, we love Bruichladdich. Is there something else that you'd like to highlight that they've been able to accomplish since this book was published? And I know Kent and I can, well, all of us can pull out different bottles from them and what we like. But is there something that comes to mind? And Nick, your hand went up, so let's go to you right away.
So what comes to mind is the fact that it's built out of cement. So that's an interesting piece. So when I was there, you go around, and I was actually there before the festival started in May. So you walk through and nothing was up and running. They were cleaning everything, shining everything up so it looked pretty before they were running the whole festival. And it was quite cold. Like the building was cold, and you sort of went through and went, why is it so cold? We had just been to Killoman, and it was warm, and it was a whole bunch of wood, and it took us a while to figure out the cement. And then reading in the book of why the cement, and it's like, oh, and it's those interesting points that came back. It's like, okay, it just, that uniqueness, and even thinking about, because we went from Bruichladdich then to Bowmore, and again, Bowmore, all wood. And it has a very warm feeling to it. And it's just a different presence when you walk into the buildings and a different approach to the business.
Is that the one, Nick, and Andrew, your question as well, where in Faisala it was surrounded and you have like a Grand Place in the middle of it, kind of that's that distillery? Good. And
Yeah.
and that made, when I was reading that, I was thinking about any place in Europe, just about any small town. You go to the center of the town, La Grande Place, and all the buildings surrounding it, and then they have that one communal place in the middle, which I love, and I really wish we did have that here in Canada, the States, anywhere. But the cobblestone for one, but the Grande Place around it, and that's what I was thinking of. So I'm glad you brought that up. I forgot about that.
Nick, which year were you there? Remind me.
2012.
Okay. And was there a restaurant there, for example? And was there a kind of lecture theatre and all these things? Because these were all the initial projects of the original team.
No, I don't remember.
No.
There was a lecture theater or a semi sort of room that you could sit down in. I think there wasn't a restaurant. There was nothing about the Academy, and I actually went online and I was wondering if the Islay Whisky Academy was sort of the branch out of what the Bruichladdich Academy was supposed to be.
And was it? Did you see a link?
I think so, because one of the gals who runs the Islay Whisky Academy started with Jim at Bruichladdich. Rachel, her name eludes me.
I'm bad with names, so you're not looking at me.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And, just as a little bit of an aside, there is a book just newly published about Jim, but it's German, and I'm waiting for the English equivalent to come out just to get that information. Andrew, you don't read German, do you?
I don't read German, much to my shame.
I thought that
was a fan.
Okay, yeah, good. Gentlemen, same thing. Do we know anything about Bruichladdich that they've done distilling wise or otherwise that you really like?
Some bottle changes over the years,
Well, they were one of your very favorite to start.
Yes.
I think that they were your gateway Scotch, were they not?
Yes, they were.
And for me, it was
interesting enough. We came in the early days, just prior to Yellow Submarine, and we drank through those, and that was just an off-the-shelf whiskey. And now everybody's got a bottle, and they're gone way up in price and stuff. I'm just glad that we were able to drink through all the good whiskeys that they put out throughout the years. And I have a large, I hate to call it a collection, because it is something that we're constantly drinking on. We do tend to buy more than we can drink. And, but I see people that are sitting on these whiskeys that are, 10 years old, and it's I'm going to resell it. It's you have 6 of them. Drink the damn things. They're doing you no good sitting in the bottle. We're built to drink, not to sell. Anyways, little rant.
That's okay. You're allowed to have a rant. That's one of the beautiful things about being on the pedal. And the After Dram, it's rant time, really.
Yeah.
Anything else?
The name is Rachel McNeil with the Islay Whisky Academy.
Okay.
That's the name I forgot.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right. So I'm going to throw out a question about Peat, because we were talking about this before. And actually, I'm bringing it back to last week, I think, is when I was saying that I could definitely tell an Islay Peat from a Highland Peat. And I was thinking about that more and more, because I can tell the difference between the Islay Peats, because I've attuned myself to the Islay Peats, and my wife's given me blind drams, and I've gotten used to them, and I can pick them out. And I can do that with some Highland Peats, the ones that are readily available that I've had. But I started thinking, does this work with all of them? And I'm going to ask the question then, how many of you have had Peats that have had a distinct iodine, Band-Aid kind of flavor that was not from Islay, that would have convinced you in a blind taste that maybe it came from Islay? Can you think of one or a couple? Nick, go for it.
There's some early Highland Parks, some early Scapa,
Okay.
Talisker Oban?
Let's go away. Okay, Oban, I'll accept, but let's go away from the islands, because the islands would have that sea influence maybe that we're thinking contributes to the flavor, and the peat possibly. So
Okay, single
away
cask.
let's go somewhere else. And Oban's great because that's on the mainland. Is there another one other than Oban, mainland, and doesn't even have to be in Scotland? Maybe it's the peats that we've been trying from Italy, Dave. And do we taste that from any of the others?
Conmera has some interesting peat, as well as Altmore.
Yes,
Okay.
I'll agree with Altmore. I don't know if I taste iodine on that one, though.
Ardmore has some iodine to it.
Does it? Okay.
Single cask does, yeah.
Okay. Huh. Dave, you've tasted a lot of peat from the region, so Canadian peats and your own from two brewers. Have you ever gotten iodine anywhere else than Isla?
I have, but I can't remember. I was hoping you wouldn't ask.
Oh, sorry.
Man, now I'm on the spot because
The answer is no. Definitely.
okay, no.
Stop.
I drink and I enjoy, and I look at things as I like it or I don't like it. And it doesn't really matter where it comes from until you read a book like Andrew's book, and then it definitely matters.
You make the connection.
Because I have a tie to Whisky Island now.
Mhm.
So, I mean, Ardbeg's kind of my guy.
Yes.
So, did I answer the question, or did I screw this up?
You skirted it perfectly, and we're off to something else, so it doesn't
You
really matter.
perfectly skirted
Andrew, I'll ask you the question, though. Do you remember that iodine flavor, the Band-Aid, the medicinal flavor coming from other whiskeys other than something on the islands or Isla
Yeah.
itself?
Well, you guys are all ahead of me here because, you know, I've spent the last 10 years working on wine principally. So I think you've been tasting a lot more whiskey. And I think there's a lot more whiskey available now than there was 10 or 15 years ago when I was,
Probably.
even 20 years ago, which is the 10 to 20 years ago was the time I was doing most of my work on whiskey. But, you know, what I would say is that the way that each of the Isla distilleries that does peat, the way in which it does peat is always slightly different. Now, of course, we can't ascribe that to a single cause. It's the result of a multiplicity of causes. But you know, I always think that sheer out and out smokiness, there's nothing really like Lefroy. If you want a kind of oily richness, you know, Lagavulin. If you want a sort of beautifully composed, you know, the peat in its frame, composed palate, Bowmore is pretty much unbeatable. Ardbeg, for me, always has a sort of cleanness to it. It's peaty, but it's also clean, you know, very cleanly peaty, perhaps because of the purifier or whatever. So, you know, even each of the Isla ones is different one from another. So it doesn't surprise me at all that if you have a Highland whiskey that's peated, it's different again. But, you know, where do those differences come from? It's very hard unless you're comparing new make, for example, to actually say that it's down to the malt source. And even then you can't say it because it could be down to the distilling practices or the brewing practices. You know, already you've got 3 stages going into the process by then. And once you've been through aging as well, there's another substantial stage of the process. So I'm a little bit wary about drawing conclusions about this. Perhaps the easiest way into the subject would be to try and be a very good subject for a kind of a technical article, to go and get analyses of all of the different peats that are being used in the Scotch whisky business. That would be very interesting, and see how different what they are one from another, depending on origin.
Andrew, could you tell us about the 2 ways or the 2 divergent views on how to analyze the PPMs then?
Yeah,
that
well,
was part of the book that I was really interested. I didn't want to do a quote because I wanted this from you, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Well, I would again have to preface this by saying when I was writing the book, because things may have changed now, they may have moved on, but when I was writing it, there were 2 different ways of analyzing the levels of peatiness. One was colorimetric analyses, and one was HPLC analysis, which was a more sort of chemical technical analysis.
Yeah.
And they did produce quite surprisingly different results on occasion. So that was a big surprise. I'd never read about that before as I was researching the book. It was a big surprise to discover that. The other big surprise that I made when I was researching and writing the book was that the original ppms in the malt don't all come through in the spirit, and then once you start aging the spirit, they drop away again. Yeah. So who was it had that bottle of Octomore? Was it you, Dol? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so you read the ppm off the back, but that's the ppm in the malt spec. Yeah. But it's not the ppm in what you're holding on your hand, which will be completely different. So this is like everything in whiskey, and indeed like everything in most alcoholic beverages. It's a very complicated question that tends to be kind of simplified a lot when we're talking about it, but we have to proceed pretty cautiously here because it has a lot of layers and nuances to it.
And I've asked that question to many distillers, and I don't always get a straight answer. Why don't we use, and the one I come up with is the mass spectrometer, because you take a reading before and then after, and you can tell the difference, and it'll tell you very specifically what the difference is scientifically. And I asked this to, I'll just say Dr. Don, which is the master blender for JP Wiser's here in Canada. And why don't you use the mass spectrometer? Because it would be more specific, more precise. And the answer inevitably comes back to money. And why do you want to do it? And then that's the reason right there. Why do you want to do it? And for me, it was to prove that ours is the most peated of any out there, or for another company to actually do theirs and say, you're not the most peated out there with this mass spectrometer. And maybe it goes from 206 parts per million down to 80 parts per million, and you're not as peaty as you thought. So I wanted something like that. I want the science to come out to prove it. And Don was stating it, you could get it done. You don't want to buy the machinery because it's very expensive, but you can get it done, and you can have it done at labs. And my father-in-law was someone who did these things in Edmonton for Alberta. And you can send it to them, and they're usually government driven, and it's about $100 anytime you want something analyzed. It's not very expensive. So it still came down to that last question. Why do you want it done? And for me, it was just so I could have the information. Why? Because I like knowing that someone's not lying to me. If it's the most peated, I want to know it's the most peated.
Absolutely. But I mean, HPLC isn't that a form of it's quite similar to mass spectrometer. It's actually looking at peaks, I think. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Doesn't it work in a similar way? Do you know or not?
I don't know. No, I'm a math teacher, not a science teacher. I'm sorry. No.
We need to do a bit of research before we blather on about this. Maybe somebody's watching who knows far more than we do, and they'll let us know in due course. And the whole game may have moved on now. It's quite an important issue, and it features a lot in marketing. So, and bearing in mind that all of the distilleries we've been talking about are now owned by very substantial companies with a lot of resources.
Yes.
It seems to me surprising that they wouldn't have a mass spectrometer around the place in any case for all sorts of purposes. So maybe these things are actually known in a much more scientific way now than they were when I wrote the book.
Just like those barrels. Just like those barrels. But
this really, I look at it from the beer side, and everybody talks about hops. They use bitterness units, and I said, well, the bitterness units don't matter unless you know the malt bill. And I draw a direct conclusion with peat. But some people they feel comfortable. If you give them that number of 208, oh yeah, that's the peatiest, I'll buy that. Or that's the hoppiest, I'll buy that. Because they've got no other thing to talk about because they don't know anything.
Yeah.
Well, we get the question all the time, oh, how hoppy is this? I said, does it matter? And it kind of puzzles them.
Well,
they want to look smart, but they don't know the right questions to ask.
Yeah.
So
I'll ask
The
the same
taste, the
question.
taste is always the final arbiter. I mean, you can make similar issues about wine to do with tannin in red wine and acidity in all wines, and particularly in white wines. And if you're talking about dessert wines, about sweetness too. But as a distinguished consulting enologist said to me recently down here in the south of France, no one drinks analyses. What you drink is the drink.
Yeah.
And the drink is very different from the analysis very often.
Excellent. Excellent way to finish that off, because there's no way to actually find out. Well, as it is right now, I'm sure people do know. I think, Andrew, you're quite right. People know exactly what it starts with, what it ends with, and the process and what's stripped out. And if they do this as opposed to this, how many more ppms are taken out. I'm sure everybody in the industry at Brook Laddie who do this know exactly what's coming out and how to manipulate us. But that's me. But I'm going to go to another question. Let's go to something that Nick and I were not arguing about, but she said I was full of crap before we started
Again?
the first. So all the time. That's okay. But that's why we love each other. We like that. So panel, I wanted to ask this question in the first week. So you saw this question 2 weeks ago. I'm wondering if any of you, when reading Andrew's topographical description, got the sense that Islay was much like Canada, because when he was writing that, I felt like I understood and could picture it. Just Canada condensed in a small little island. So take all of Canada, squish it together, and then this island's got many parts of Canada. So I'll add to this that it seems very much like Canada in relation to weather as well. And I'm going to give the quote from page 228. I lay in a bed of bracken to rest for 20 minutes as warmly and comfortably as a dozing cat. Yet, the very same morning, getting out of bed and opening the curtains at Macri Hotel, Macri, Islay. Thank you. Hotel in Islay had been immobile, held in a vice of steely winter mist. Expect anything at any time. And that feels like Alberta. And last Saturday, as we were talking, it was sunny and beautiful outside. By 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we had a blizzard. It was. We went from beautiful, no snow left on the ground, to blizzard. And if you're probably about 7 to 10 centimeters worth of snow. So the weather made me feel like Scotland, as well as the topography. How about you guys? And Nick, we'll end with you because we know that you don't agree with me. So let's end with that one.
So I'll start because I'm always got the simplest answer to everybody. This just reminds me of northern Ontario, northern Alberta. Like it's rough conditions. There's bugs. There's all kinds of stuff, and that's how I see Islay.
Okay, good stuff.
And every once in a while, there's a distillery.
Yeah, yeah. Bug, landscape, distillery. Yeah, No, this very much. We were lucky to visit the East Coast islands, and very similar. The only thing I find it, looking at Nicole's pictures last week and doing our trip, I was actually going to bring some of our pictures and post them off screen, but the biggest difference is that when you're in Islay, you're actually at ocean level. When you're on the East Coast, you're 200 feet up. It's a big cliff, but other than that, the terrain is almost identical. The second part of this is when you're talking about the dozing cat, I get flashbacks to Ralphie's book and his orange cat that's been long gone for 12 years.
In front of the fireplace, yeah.
Caddies. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Nick. And then Andrew will tell either one of us that we're both wrong, both right, or somewhere in the middle. He's very good at that.
There's some similarities, yes, but I don't think you can take the Canadian Shield and that's what Islay is. Having been to Northern Ontario and seeing the Canadian Shield, having been to the East Coast and seeing the rock there, having been to Northern Canada up like Yellowknife area and seeing that rock face there, it's also different. There's elements of that absolutely at Islay, on that island, but it's different. It's not the same. Like there's pieces, but it's not all the same pieces.
Okay. And how you see it, though, let's say the Rocky Mountains, and we were saying this before. I said the Rocky Mountains with the jagged peaks, or we talk about the Laurentians, which are very old mountains and very hilly, as opposed to the Rocky Peaks. Does that not feel kind of like it? You've seen it, so.
So Scotland doesn't have mountains like we have mountains in Alberta. Their mountains are like our foothills.
Okay.
Like Ben Nevis is not tall at all.
So it's
really,
scalable.
yeah, it's quite easy to go up. So even the rock faces on Isla, they're hard to climb, but it's like northern rock faces in like going north, going more in that northern Canada, but not like it's not mountainous as we know mountains.
Okay.
It's rocks that have been pushed up, but they're different types of rocks.
But wouldn't it be boring if every country you went to looked the same?
Yes.
Well, here,
Like, that's what the fun about travel is.
Kent put some pictures up here, which is good. So that reminds me of Canada, but
Yeah,
the West
this is
Coast.
Newfoundland.
That's PI.
Newfoundland, actually.
And so, do you have any other pictures there from Nick? A whole bunch
Oh,
of pictures? Yeah, fantastic. I didn't want to put them on because my bandwidth does tricky things with pictures. So
There's probably more, but this is second screen, so
we'll go back to us. Okay.
hang on.
Thank
I
you
will-
very much, Nick. Love the opinion, and I'm okay being told I'm wrong. Obviously, that's Andrew. What do you think?
Okay.
Andrew, have you been to Canada and the States?
Yes, I have. I know Niagara area quite well because there's a lot of wine around there. So that part of Ontario I'm pretty familiar with. I've also been to Vancouver, Vancouver Island, and the Okanagan. So I know all of those areas quite well. But obviously Canada is a vast place and there are many, many parts of Canada I don't know. By the way, I haven't mentioned this so far. My grandmother was from Owen Sound in Ontario. So I'm a quarter Canadian.
La famille. Good. I'm glad to hear
I'm
it.
very proud of it.
Part of us.
Here's some more beautiful pictures coming up. But I mean, there is one clear similarity, which is that if you set off from Isla's west coast and you just keep going, you will eventually come to Newfoundland on the other side. So I think that the Atlantic part of Eastern Canada would be quite similar to Isla because it's also the Atlantic. It has a very Atlantic kind of climate pattern. And when expect anything at any time, that the other key phrase that people often use about Isla weather is 4 seasons in a day. So you can go there any time of year and you can still have 4 seasons in a day. I mean, I've been there in February and it's been beautifully sunny and I've been walking and wearing a t-shirt. And I've been there in August and it's cold and it's miserable and the rain's thrashing down and, you know, it's like midwinter. So you can always expect 4 seasons in a day, which I think is very typical of Northern Atlantic weather patterns. So my guess, my unproven guess, is that parts of the eastern seaboard would be quite similar to Isla. Lower parts, because as has been pointed out by Nick, Isla is pretty low island. It was called the Queen of the Hebrides because it had so much agricultural land. If you go to Skye, for example, or Arran, they're much, much rockier, much steeper, much more inhospitable. Isla was never like that. It's quite low.
Okay.
So, but when you get over to the Pacific coast of Canada, I think things feel very different there. When I was in Vancouver, for example, and Vancouver Island, there's something about the Pacific that's just very, very different. And I didn't really see any similarities. So to me, the similarities that there would be with maritime Eastern Canada. The other thing to say is, of course, that Isla has an extraordinarily intense maritime climate. You know, you can grow palm trees on Isla in the southern part, in protected parts of the south, whereas most of Canada would have a fairly rigorous continental climate. So you'd have very hot summers, but you'd have very, very cold winters, and you'd have very swift shoulder seasons, very swift autumns, and very swift springs.
Yes.
Maritime climate is completely the opposite of that. Everything is floating from one season into another in a very kind of lackadaisical, tenuous way. So I would think that most of central Canada would be quite different also, because it would be very continental.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Could get the expert's opinion on these. And now I was thinking of another question we had way back when. And I think this might have been first week as well, because it's from page 87. It was easier to reach most Scottish islands and coastal settlements from a southern Norwegian port than it would have been to reach those locations by overland route from Glasgow or Edinburgh. And I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but it made sense. It really did. So all this to explain why, in the late 8th century, using the very latest in modern technology and advanced warfare techniques, the Vikings arrived to rape, kill, and plunder. And Andrew does a great job of explaining why the Vikings and not the Roman Empire were able to take and keep holding the islands in northern parts of Scotland. And this is just something with me, because I've been watching another show on TV where they're trying to find remnants of the Iron Age in all throughout the empire. So in Scotland, in English, trying to find these, which is prior to the Romans coming. And it's just another part of the history that we gloss over a little bit on our part. Whereas if you're from Scotland, they're very attuned to the history and the Romans coming and how they didn't get beyond a certain wall and the takeover of the Picts. It's really kind of interesting in those terms. And Andrew, were you a history person as well before this? Did you get that?
Well, as I've sort of alluded to, there's nothing I'm not interested in. So I love history too, but I never studied history systematically. And in fact, trying to research the early history of Islay was one of the most challenging things I've ever done, because it's extremely complicated. But to go back to your point, yes, I mean, this is clearly the case. Scotland is very, very difficult terrain to traverse on the land. If you imagine Scotland with no roads, as the Romans would have come up to it. It's why they never went further north than Hadrian's Wall, essentially. It was just such tough country. The roads are the sea roads. That was why it was so easy for the Scandinavians to come down, because all they had to do was take the sea roads. And if you were a skilled enough sailor, and if you could navigate in a relatively sophisticated way for the time, that there was no great impediment, other than you didn't know what you were going to find at the other end, but you could easily get there. So it was much, much easier for a Scandinavian to reach Islay than it was for anybody coming up from the English mainland using land routes. Much easier. And that explains a lot of the early history of the island.
And I'm gonna link that to another one. Oh, go ahead, Dave. He's done. Okay, sorry, but I'm linking that to another one. So a great line that also got me thinking, and it's along these lines, just after that quote, actually. Rape beyond a generation can give way to love and marriage. Raiders become colonists, colonists become locals. And it makes sense, but I don't know if we think of things in those terms all that often. And again, it hits home. Rape beyond a generation can give way to love and marriage, and then the integration into the new society. And how much did that society change because of the Vikings on Islay is what I'm thinking.
I don't think we can ever really know that, Dolph, because we're going back so far in history, and the threads are so complicated. And in any case, if you look at the indigenous society at the time, it was a pretty terrible society. Another very interesting thing for me in researching this book, I'm sure some of you know Shakespeare's Macbeth, one of his greatest plays, his paciest play, his most exciting play in many ways. And it portrays horrible behavior, murder, madness, everybody treating everybody else in a pretty despicable and contemptible manner.
Mm-hmm.
And when you research what was going on in the Scottish Islands in the century preceding the moment at which Shakespeare wrote that play, you realize that he could have been doing up-to-date reportage of the latest in Hebridean politics, because everybody was literally, murdering each other, treating each other in the most horrible and brutal manner, grabbing power whenever they could. Yeah. And we're already talking about 300 or 400 years after the infusion of the Scandinavian. So what it was actually like before that, which is the period we call the Dark Ages in any case, is really almost impossible to say. It's a very good question. Maybe there are historians who could get us some way down that road, but I certainly can't. And I actually wonder if it really is possible to go. It's a bit like going back, 500 million years in geology. By the time you go back 500 million years, wherever you're looking at on the surface of the Earth, everything has happened at some point or another. It's been an ocean 23 times. It's been completely glaciated. It's been in the tropics. It's been in the poles. Everything has happened when you go back that far. And in a way, going back, 10 centuries and a small Hebridean island, you can say much the same thing, I think.
Perfect. And we're going to kind of wrap this up, but I'm going to put a question out there for the panel and everyone else, being anyone else out there that wants to type in. So we have 2 distilleries coming up. So we have Lagavulin Lefroy and 2 other chapters. So the Shipwrecks and Distilleries Past and Future. I'm wondering, because I don't read the chapters until just before. I don't like to have I don't like having foresight before I'm trying to write the questions for this week. And I'm wondering what you guys are looking forward to in those chapters. Is there something specific? Because I know a couple of us really like Lagavulin and Lefroy. We've talked about Shipwrecks here in Canada and there. So I'm wondering if there's something that's really piquing your interest you're looking forward to. So Nick, the hand went up. Go for it.
I'm not sure it'll be in the chapters because, like you, I don't read ahead, but I like the foreshadowing of Ardnahoe that is sort of peppered throughout the writing already, knowing that this is a new distillery that has opened up on Islay, and seeing how its opening is maybe being sort of hinted at and how the foundation is being built with this book. And how it's being created as you're writing this book. And that has me so curious and it has me intrigued because there's so much already sort of mythos about the creation of this distillery, because who's behind it and all that build up. So just seeing that name in there is like, who?
Yeah, just to go back to that, Nick, I when I was writing the book, it was Kilchoman that was coming. I don't think we'd even heard about Ardnahoe at that stage. I'm sure, Dave obviously refers to it in his introduction, but it was sort of Kilchoman that was taking shape as I was actually researching the book.
But you reference Ardnahoe as a place.
As a place. Yeah, sure.
On Islay. So that's where I'm intrigued because it's an actual physical location on Islay. And it's past Bunnahabhain. It's a location, and I'm like, okay, and Jim's involved with it, so it's that creation. Yeah, Kilchoman was the up and comer. It was that whole farm to bottle, that newcomer, that little fighter coming out of the box and proving everybody wrong. But yeah, for me, it was, as I'm reading this, going, oh, Ardnahoe. Even when you were writing it, it had an echo. Because of a place name, and that place name has now come sort of full circle to being a distillery.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Good one. Dave or Kent, either one. Shipwrecks, Lag, Lefroy.
Shipwrecks. Yeah. There's I've been many places in the world where we've been able to scuba dive through shipwrecks and stuff like that. So it's got a small place in my heart.
So for me, it's been so interesting what I've read so far that I can't wait to read the rest of it.
Okay.
But it's not like I'm trying to find out who killed the professor.
Yes.
But it's just more and more information, and I love that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And we're going to end with Andrew. Is there something, when you were writing the end of this book, why are you putting Shipwrecks towards the end of it? And I know I'm going to find out, but is there a hint that we can find out what guided your writing process there with that specifically? Because obviously Distiller's Past and Future is a fantastic finale, but why the Shipwrecks in the middle of those two, Lag and Lefroy?
Sure. Well, in fact, the final chapter of the non-whiskey chapters is the Islay Today chapter, where I kind of provide a description of Islay society as it was when I wrote the book in the early 2000s, the early part of the new century. Well, when I was up on Islay and researching everything else, quite often the subject of shipwrecks would come up. I mean, Islay has got a colossal number of shipwrecks all around it. And I definitely wanted to write a chapter devoted to that. When I began to research some of the stories, they were so moving and so hair-raising and so thought-provoking that it would have been completely wrong to put that at the beginning of the book, because it has a sort of climactic quality almost. When you're talking about the human drama implicit in the place, those are perhaps the most dramatic moments of all, the summits, as far as we know. Maybe it was like that back in the Macbeth times and back in the Viking arrival times, but we just can't know about that. Whereas we do know quite a lot about particularly the most significant shipwrecks, which you'll read about, before next week. So these, for me, it was a sort of climactic moment in terms of the story of the island. And it also sort of seals the story, because we are talking about an island. We're talking about a wild place. The wildness is a very important part of the story. So if you have an island and you have a wild sea all around it, what are you inevitably going to have? You're going to have shipwrecks.
Yeah.
So it had a sort of climactic quality in terms of the story of the whole place. So that was really the reason for making it the penultimate of those non-whiskey chapters.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I am. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. That's all the time we have today. It's been a fantastic afternoon. Thank you to the listeners, present and future. Thanks to the panel, Dave, Kent, Nick. And a special thank you to Andrew for coming on with us again. And here we go. As always, here's to good company. Here's to good whiskey. Here's to good books. Here's to good conversation. And here's to seeing you all next week, Saturday, April 24th, 2021 at noon, Mountain Daylight Time, for our Whiskey Book Club's 10th book. This one right here, Whisky Island, A Portrait of Islay and its Whiskeys. And if you don't want to miss a minute, do like I say every week, like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you then. Have a fantastic weekend.
Buy the book.
Buy the book. Cheers, guys.